is going on here? What? Come on. Okay, it's never done this before. Oh boy.
I have 7 items, all from the thrift store. Each cost me under $10. Today's goal is to take those 7 items and see if we can make them look like they cost me a whole lot more. I have a confession to make. I'm not allowed to play Scrabble. Seriously, my family has banned me from playing Scrabble because apparently I play something called full contact Scrabble. I am, however, allowed to buy Scrabble at the thrift stores to DIY with, as long as that's all I do. Finding Scrabble games at the thrift store, though, is rare. So every time I see one, I pick it up. This one's fun.
And here's that Scrabble board that I found at the thrift store for $3.99, which in my humble opinion was a complete steal. You'll also need a wooden canvas. I'm just using this one from Dollarama, and some antiquing wax. I'm going in with the dark brown one from Art Minds. Apply the stain to the outside framing of the board, and we're also going to apply this stain to the inside part of the board because we're going for more of a 3D look, and then just let that dry completely. To add a bit more interest to the finished look, I decided to go in with a half flower stencil motif that I have from this stencil from the dollar store, but really any pattern would do as long as you have a decorative stencil. I'm wanting to keep this design fairly neutral, so I'm going in with the Folk Art Milk Jug chalk paint and some Folk Art chalk paint in oatmeal. Go in with a small dry stenciling brush. I used the greener oatmeal color for the flower petal parts and the lighter color for the centers. Apply this motif all the way around the entire frame and then let that dry. Because once that's had a chance to dry, you're going to go in with a bit of sandpaper and just scuff everything up. You want this to look like a well-loved piece of art. You're going to need a little bit of wood glue because you're going to be adhering those Scrabble tiles to the inside part of your frame using a pattern that you can get from at Jenny's Place Printable Library. The link for that is in the description below. That uses a whole bunch of summer words that are fun and really represent this time of year. Using a small paintbrush, apply some of that wood glue to the back of each of the tiles and then carefully place them onto the inside part of the board, making sure that you line them up perfectly straight with equal spaces in between. And here's the finished look. I'd love to know what you think in the comments below.
I have a big garden. I mean, a really big garden. And so I'm constantly growing herbs. I also love to cook, so I'm constantly using my herbs. So I'm not quite sure if I'm going to turn this into a planter or into a way to store my herbs on the windowsill once I've picked them. So I guess we're going to find out together.
It's time for the next DIY, and hey, if you're enjoying what you've seen so far, make sure that you subscribe and give me a thumbs up. I found this black metal textured tin at the thrift store for $4.99, and I'm going in again with that rusty look I love so much. To start off with, cover the entire metal planter with some white chalk paint, letting that dry overnight so that the next day you could go in again with that chalk paint and give it a second coat. The first step to creating this faux rusty look is to use a bit of Art Minds copper chalk paint. Working in one small area at a time, apply the chalk paint with a dry paintbrush in long strokes and then go in with a damp rag and wipe away that copper chalk paint, really working it into the white paint. Then to soften everything up and make it look like the rust is coming from the underneath out, go back in with a bit more of that white chalk paint and a stenciling brush and blend it all in together. Continue alternating between these steps until you get the entire tin planter completely covered with a blended white and rusty paint. Now we move on to the second step of creating faux rusty look by using some Mod Podge. Using a small dry stenciling brush, working in small areas at a time, apply a a bit of that Mod Podge on top of the tin, because now you're going to go in with a little bit of cinnamon, and you're going to sprinkle that cinnamon over top of the Mod Podge that you've applied to your planter. Focus this on the areas where you think that rust would naturally form. So around the ledge. On the one I bought, there was a spot to put a label on the front. So I put a bunch of the rust around that. And then there was also these little feet at the bottom. These are the areas that rust would naturally form. So apply most of your faux cinnamon rust to those areas and then work a little bit in just in and around the rest of the tin. Let that completely dry overnight and then go in with a clean, soft bristled brush and wipe away any of that excess cinnamon so that all that you're left with is that cinnamon that actually adhered to your tin planter. Now, to make sure that that faux rusty cinnamon stays in place, you're going to want to use some Rust-Oleum matte clear finishing spray and just give this whole tin planter 2 coats of the spray, making sure that you focus quite a bit on the areas that actually have the cinnamon just to ensure it adheres and stays in place. I thought about drilling holes into the bottom of the planter to use it outside as an actual herb planter, but in the end I decided to put some mason jars inside, fill that with water, and use this to store my herbs from the garden for when I'm cooking in the kitchen.
Technically, this one came from a thrift store shopping trip like a while back, but it cost under $10. I started to DIY it, trying to make it look like painted aged terracotta. It was actually working, if you look. Yeah, I ran out of time, put it aside, and now I'm looking at it again, and I still want this guy to be terracotta. So we're gonna see what we can do with this.
Last week I did a Pottery Barn dupe where I turned a vase into more of a terracotta look. I'll just link that video here. And I liked this so much, I thought we would do something similar to this old candle stand. Now you could just go in with the terracotta paint here that I got from Amazon, but I wanted to give this a bit more of that terracotta texture. So I'm mixing this with a little bit of baking soda paint, but not a lot. You really want this to be liquidy. You just want that baking soda to provide a bit of texture. Paint that baking soda terracotta paint mixture all over the candle stand and then let that dry completely overnight so that the next day you can apply a second coat of the terracotta baking soda mixture and paint that again all over the entire candlestick. Only this time you're just going to let it dry until it gets slightly tacky, and then you're going to go in with your stenciling brush and pounce that stenciling brush up and down into the tacky terracotta baking soda paint mixture in order to add a ton of additional texture. Let that dry completely and then go in with a little bit of Art Minds antiquing wax. Using a dry stenciling brush, pounce that antiquing wax in different areas around your candlestick. This is to make the candlestick look like it's a bit weather worn, old, just to add a little bit more interest so that it looks like it's aged terracotta and not something you've just recently painted. Mind you, go a little heavy-handed on some areas with that antiquing wax, no biggie. Just grab another stenciling brush, add a little bit of that terracotta paint, and soften and blend everything in together. They're going to be going in a place in our yard that is slightly sheltered but still outside, so I'm going to spray this with a Rust-Oleum matte clear top coat, and here they are all upcycled and ready to head to their spot in the yard. Now, would you use these as candlesticks or would you use these as planter bases?
When I was a young new mom, Martha Stewart was all the rage. And I can't remember if it was in her magazine or if it was on her TV show, but she did this DIY where she made a moss bowl out of tree trunks. It was really cool. And I've been wanting to do that for so long. So at the thrift store, I found something that inspired me to try this DIY. So decades later, today's gonna be that day.
Now here is the bowl that I found for the moss garden, but I'm not really loving the way it looks in its original state. It's a bit cheap looking and pinky for my taste. So before we can get started in the moss part, we're gonna have to give this thing a makeover. It seemed to me that what this metal bowl really wanted to be was a faux stone bowl. So to do this, we're going to go in again with my favorite white paint and baking soda paint mixture. In a cup, mix together your white chalk paint along with some baking soda and stir this together to combine until you get a consistency that's a lot like wall plaster. I did not do the inside because we're going to be putting some moss in here. If you wanted to and skip the moss part and just use this as a decorative bowl, you certainly could. Once you get the entire thing covered with the baking soda paint mixture, allow that to dry completely overnight. On the next day, you're going to want to add a bit more of that baking soda to your paint mixture so that you end up with a mixture that is a lot like your wall plaster but thicker. Now I have my little faux stone kit here, and in it I have various spices. I have some sage, some garam masala, crushed chili pepper flakes. I also have some old pepper flakes that my daughter used to eat on her pasta and hasn't touched in a while, and then some soil that I just got from a small bag from the Dollar Tree. To apply this, I like to use an old waxing brush that I have that had gotten a little worse for wear, and I use this to apply that thicker baking soda mixture onto my bowl. Now it's time to get messy. I just throw those spices on, the herbs, the chili pepper flakes, the soil. I just toss it and pat it down with my hands. I make a giant mess. It's so much fun. And then to work everything in, I just go in again with that baking soda paint mixture on the large paintbrush and pounce that all over, just getting those spices to blend into the paint mixture and create a look I think resembles faux stone. Now you're going to want to work in smaller patches, starting with your baking soda paint mixture and then adding the spice, blending it in, and then moving to a different area on your pot. In order to make this a real moss bowl and not a faux moss bowl, I had to brave the elements, head out into the forest, and find myself some moss. Now, if memory serves me right, I believe we start with some rocks at the bottom of our bowl. This is an important step for drainage. Next, you're going to want to top that with some topsoil. I just have some potting mix that I got from Dollar Store, and you just want to add enough to cover the rocks and have a little bit underneath for the moss to sit on. When I was selecting the moss to take home, I made sure that I picked pieces that had quite a bit of natural matter underneath of it so that it still had something to grow off of. And then I placed that on top of the soil, nestling it in so that everything just kind of fit nice and snug, and there was contact between both the topsoil and the organic matter that the moss was growing on top of. I was also careful to select different types of moss. I was going for different textures and I wanted different heights. So when you're selecting your moss, whether it's real or faux, make sure you're working in those different shades of green, that different texture, those different styles of moss, because this in the end will ensure that your moss bowl is just full of interest. Now, I believe in order to keep this alive and growing, you're going to want to mist it every once in a while. So when you're misting, just make sure you're misting the top and not hitting the actual bowl itself. And here you go, the finished look. I'm dying to know what you think.
Might have got a little ahead of myself. I prematurely spray painted this. Luckily, I do have some footage from last week's seashell video, which I will link above. So let's see what we can do with this guy.
Okay, this is the moment I got a little spray happy, but here is the vase in its original state. And I just went in with some flat Rust-Oleum spray paint and gave the entire thing a couple of quick coats. Now, I had originally planned on doing a faux enamel look that I've done before and love, and it works well with my decor, but things went a little sideways. When this happened, hubby said he once talked to one of the paint ladies at Home Depot, and this is a common occurrence. It looks like someone bought the paint, painted whatever it was they needed to paint, filled it with water, replaced the lid, brought it back to Home Depot, and got their money back. Home Depot, not knowing this had happened, put it back on the shelf and then unknowingly sold the defected paint to me. Has anyone else ever had this happen? Now, I bought this paint a long time ago, so it was way past the point in which I could return it. Luckily, this happened to be a blessing in disguise. I got so frustrated with the way that the paint was applying that I took my paintbrush and stabbed at it, and oh my goodness, I love the way this looks. It created this like faux marble look on it that I'm obsessed with. And so instead of fighting it, I went with it. I did switch out though my flat paintbrush for my old trusty waxing brush just to give it that texture while pouncing up and down on that really saturated chalk paint. Now, I can't exactly tell you to go out and buy a bulky can of paint. So what I can tell you is just add water to your chalk paint, and it stands to reason that you should end up with a similar look. Wanting this to have a shine to it so that it looked like polished marble, I decided to go with the clear glossy Rust-Oleum top coat instead of the matte. I had originally planned matte for the enamel, but this beauty, she deserved a little bit of shine.
This is the easiest DIY, but the end look, wow. Just wow.
For this DIY, you're going to need a good quality basket. I found this one at the thrift store and I loved the light tone to it. It's going to work perfectly for this DIY. You're also going to need a bunch of faux lavender stems. I found these ones at Dollarama in the springtime, but I know you can often find similar ones at Dollar Tree, at other craft stores, or I even found a few different options on Amazon. I had this bucket of stucco with some stucco mix still left in it from my first real DIY fail. From that pot one I put out, the stucco one, it lasted for a few weeks and then crumbled apart. It was very sad. So I'm not happy with this bucket, so I'm putting it inside this DIY. I'm giving it a second chance at life, and topped that with some floral foam and then stuck in it my faux lavender stems until it was nice, lush, and full, and you could no longer see the floral foam or the inside of the basket. And the finished look.
If you enjoyed those, make sure you subscribe. Give me a thumbs up. If you hit that notification bell, it'll let you know the next time I upload. Oh, and you might enjoy these.